Welcome back, my bats in the belfry. I'm Fox, any pronouns, and it's time for another Treat or Terror with Treehouse of Horror 21. We've got another one that aired in November, folks. We start off this time with a fun father-son bonding moment. And by bonding, I mean brutalizing Halloween style. Then we get Frink talking to the audience like Marge did all the way back in the beginning, explaining how to fast forward if this is too much for their little darlings. This leads into a parody sequence of The Office, involving classic monsters like Frankenstein's creature, Wolfman, and a witch who sharpens her claws in the pencil sharpener. Some fun gags. Our first segment is War and Pieces. While the title is a play on War and Peace, the actual plot is a little like Jumanji, except with classic board games whose names are changed for copyright purposes. The dice heads are hilariously horrible to think about. I do enjoy Marge gleefully playing Clue, too.
He was going to leave me, and I'm too old to find anyone else.
Marge sees Bart and Milhouse playing a violent video game and forces them to choose a board game to play instead. They choose Satan's Path, a game with great presentation, I gotta say. It brings those other boring board games into real life. Horrifically. We get a quick cameo of King and Kodos in here, too. So the pair set off to end the madness by finishing all the games. Milhouse doesn't make it far before letting himself drown. Bart races to finish the game of mouse catch, having to kill an army of living playing cards. Everything goes back to normal. Then they play Hangman and die. This one was okay. It's definitely one of those segments that suffers from not having enough time to really explore its premise. There was plenty here for double its runtime, probably even a full 22-minute episode. And there are jokes here that land well, some fun visuals, plenty to work with. If anything, it feels more like one of those extended trailers that basically tells you everything that happened in the movie. Our second segment is Master and Cadaver. A delightful reference to Master and Commander. Here, in a parody of the 1989 Australian film Dead Calm, Homer and Marge are at sea, enjoying a second honeymoon. But then they see a lone man in a lifeboat and bring him on board. He says his name is Roger, and he was a chef on the Albatross. His employer attempted to poison a pie he had made, but Roger caught him and was knocked unconscious. When he came to, everyone on board was dead, so he fled. Homer super doesn't trust the guy. Mostly he's jealous, though. Marge is in the middle of chastising him when she sees a shark floating in the water, a pie Roger just made in its mouth. So Marge and Homer work together to kill him and throw his body overboard. Afterwards, they come across the Albatross, and when they go on board, they see the grisly scene he spoke of, including the broken bottle used to knock him out. They're racked with grief. Then Roger shows up, still alive. He is understandably upset, and explains the shark died from the fuel leaking from their boat. Homer harpoons Roger, so he won't tell anyone they tried to kill him. Then suddenly the businessmen on the Albatross come to. It appears one member assumed they might get poisoned, so he gave everyone an antidote, making them possible witnesses, so Homer kills them too. Not even the seagull is safe. Marge takes a bite of poison pie, so she doesn't have to live with the guilt. Which pans out to Maggie, and a cute little reference to A Clockwork Orange. Homer being jealous was boring to me, but Homer needlessly killing everyone was incredibly funny. I give this episode a solid B. It's not a bad one. The twist was delightful. Finally, we have Tweenlight, a parody of the Twilight series. We open up on an unknown POV going through the forest after a deer, then a grilled cheese stand, where they get a sandwich that is literally just 2 slices of bread. What the fuck? You couldn't animate even some marks on the bread to show it's fried? No hints of cheese? Just 2 slices of bread? It turns out this is Edmund Dracula, the new kid in school, voiced by Daniel Radcliffe, who does an amazing job with a frankly terrible script. After saving Lisa's life several times, he risks her way up to a tree. She realizes he's a vampire and is instantly smitten. Then we see Milhouse, who transforms into a little werepoodle. Edmund and his father come over for dinner. For a second, I thought the dad would just straight up be a bat, but was quickly disappointed as he transforms into a more stereotypical universal Dracula type of vampire. In a highlight of the segment, the family cannibalizes Ned Flanders. The kids quickly grow embarrassed by their father, so they sneak off. Marge makes the men go find them. In the second highlight of the segment, we get cameos of other famous vampires like Nosferatu, Blackula, Count Chocula, and more. They catch sight of the kids climbing a belfry. Lisa is ready to be bitten, until she realizes she's going to be ate forever. She takes back consent, but the bloodlust is upon Edmund. Both fathers step in to save their children from each other, and the vampires reconcile. So Homer sacrifices himself to Edmund's bloodlust, and Dracula's. His blood is full of cholesterol, however, so it kills them both. And now Homer is a vampire. Lisa's face at the end here is about how I feel. This was easily the worst of this episode, and frankly, some of the worst The Simpsons has shown so far. Boring is the first word that comes to mind. It's not really a good parody, it's not saying anything new about Twilight that hadn't been driven into the ground already in 2010 when this aired. Also, its own lore doesn't even make sense. It straight up says at the end that Edmund was a vampire as a baby, possibly born that way, but then there's all this talk about him being 8 years old forever. And yes, maybe it's silly to ask for continuity in something like this, but I'm already going to be nitpicky when right off the bat, yes, pun intended, this has felt lazy. I hate to use that word. I know how much effort goes into writing and animating, but everything here is just badly done, rushed, half-assed. It's funny because reviews I read of this episode as a whole claim Twilight as the best, and that is just not how I see it. I should say, I'm not a fan of the Twilight series. I was a teen when it first came out, I got the first book, then I read it, and immediately hated it. I've seen some great, hilarious jokes and commentary about the series, but none of that is here. I would say it's safe to skip this whole Treehouse. This whole episode does make it feel like they're really stretching themselves thin, trying to grasp at something for these specials. It's so disappointing, especially with how fantastic I felt about the previous year's Treehouse. Hopefully next year's will fare better. And that's it for now. Thanks for joining my lucid screaming.